Parents, what spooky past life memory did your kid utter?
My youngest, 4 to 5, would tell about how warm and cozy she was in my belly, how cold and scary it was to be born, and how the hardest part was that she used to know everything, but now she doesn't know anything. I would give her space to talk. Her frustration at almost being able to remember everything was almost palpable.
I can relate heavily to your kid. My whole childhood I would get frustrated that I can't do things good enough. For example, I had a plastic cube that had different shapes cut into each side and plastic puzzle pieces that fit those shapes. So you'd put the piece in the hole and it would fall inside the cube. I can recall getting super frustrated with it, realizing this is an easy task, but feeling extreme frustration with my lack of motor skills. I experienced this feeling with various tasks all throughout my childhood. I can recall that same feeling while learning how to write, feeling like my brain is smart but my hand is dumb. I don't know quite how to explain it, but I've always felt like an adult trapped in a child's body. I'd have the beginnings of a very complex thought as a child, but couldn't quite work it out, even though it felt like something I already knew. Like your child said, it feels like you know this thing, but you don't really know it. I completely get what she means.
I can also relate. I remember when first starting kindergarten, seeing the alphabet at the top of the chalkboard and the teacher pointing to the letters and saying them out loud to us and having us repeat them. It was like I felt my heart skip a bit at seeing the letters, and I thought to myself, I remember the alphabet. I cannot wait to write words again. I cannot wait to write cat and dog. And as she went along saying the letters, I was ahead of her by 5 or 6 letters in my head and was frustrated by her not going faster saying the letters.
When my daughter was 3 and starting to talk, Clearer was talking to someone, and concerned, I walked into the bedroom and no one was there. Initially, I thought it was her playing with her toys. Days later, the same scenario, but this time I asked who she was talking to, and she replied, "Your grandma." I thought she meant my mom, who had recently passed, so I showed a pic of her and asked, "Is this her?" "No, your grandma," was the reply. I found a picture of my grandma, and she, with a big smile, said, "Yes, her." I was shocked since I don't have pictures of my grandma displayed, and she died 1991, and my daughter born 2015.
Sort of along these lines. I am 60 years of age, never having biological children, but am the proud grandfather of several wonderful children. I am the adopted one. My lady and I have been together for 28 years, and her children have children now. One day my granddaughter, around the age of 4 years old, went to her mother and asked, "What happened to Papa's babies?" There was 2 of them, but they're dead now. It so happened that when I was 13 or 14, my girlfriend at the time got pregnant. There was an abortion. My girlfriend always said they were twins. I never really believed her, and never argued the point. I think of this a lot now in my old age.
Same thing happened to us. My daughter was about 2 when my wife miscarried with a second pregnancy. Then she had severe issues about a week later at home, and it was like she miscarried again. I told her I thought it was twins, but it was never medically proven. My daughter walks out of her bedroom one day and says, "Mom, what happened to Ann and Kylie?" Wife asked her who she was talking about, and she said, "The baby's in your tummy. I named them."
Not a parent. I remember telling my mom when I was about 3 about my royal family. I still have this cryptic memory of standing in a desert with a dark, shallow pool. The sun was setting, and my younger brother reaches down and splashes the water in the pool, and everyone got very upset. There was something sacred about this pool. It has always been a lasting memory for me. I met someone when I was 16, and we stayed friends, and when we were 18, we talked about reincarnation, and he told me the exact same story, only from the brother's perspective. I had never told him about my memory. Still freaks me out to this day.
Did your friend explain why he, as the brother, splashed the sacred water?
He said he was just being a little kid and not knowing what it meant to do that. But neither of us know why it was taboo to touch the water. I've scoured the internet searching something about it and have never found anything.
I was the child in this case. I don't remember any of this, but when I was 4, we traveled to Ireland to visit my dad's grandparents. We were walking through a shopping area when I started yelling about wanting to see the train and ran into a shop. My parents ran in after me as I was going nuts about some train. There was no train, it was a clothing store. The woman working there asked my parents what I was doing as I was just running around frantically. I finally yelled, "The train!" I had found in the back of the store a framed newspaper clipping from the 1940s of the front window of this shop, when it was a toy store, and there was a big model train scene set up.
The following conversation happened between my wife and our youngest when she was 3 or 4. Daughter: I remember my old mommy. Wife: what? Daughter: like I was born, and then I was really cold. But then I woke up and you were my new mommy. And later head on my wife. My youngest was born with complications. She was intubated and spent 2 weeks in the NICU, so there's that.
Not exactly the same thing, but my 5-year-old daughter has been saying things like, "When I look in mirrors, there are a lot of people in here, and why were so many people in my room last night?" For like 2 years. Update: it had been a while since she said anything like the above, but yesterday at dinner she turned around and looked behind her, then said, "Sometimes I hear voices behind me, but when I look back, no one is there."
My daughter, when she was 3, used to talk about her imaginary friend all the time. Said he was big and fun and spent a lot of time playing with her. One day I was scanning old photos and had a photo of my father on my desk, and she said, "Hey, how did you get a photo of my friend?" I instantly got shivers down my spine. My father died in the house for 15 years previously, and she played in a room that used to be his office. I cautiously asked her to tell me more about her friend, and without hesitating, she told me he talked funny. The chills stopped me dead in my tracks because Dad was an Aussie who never lost his accent.
My brother, when he was 3/4, was sleeping in another room when my dad called me and said that our grandfather has passed away. My brother wakes up a little bit later and says to me, "Where's Grandpa?" Going, I saw him flying away. Literally one of the only memories I couldn't explain away.
Obligatory not the parent, but the kid here. Apparently used to have rather frequent bouts of nightmares back when I was 4, and it always began with me screaming the name Sarah, then calling for help loudly, which would wake pretty much everyone in the house up, and ending with me just blubbering out, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," over and over and over again, all the while crying and sobbing. When I would wake up in the morning, I'd have no recollection about any of this. My parents had no idea what caused it, given that they knew no one named Sarah that I had interacted with. We had no TV or anything of the sort. I hadn't begun going to preschool yet, and didn't know how to read beyond a few simple words. Nothing they did seemed able to stop it either. The whole thing went on for a good long while, almost a year, until one day, it just sort of stopped. Mom apparently tried asking me once about it, and Kid Me said something to the effect of, "Sarah doesn't want to see me crying anymore, so I won't." Didn't actually know any of this happened until some years back when I got to talking to my parents about how I always found the name Sarah to be beautiful.
I used to have the same type of thing happening, like I would have panic attacks in the middle of the night, and I would be hot, and sometimes I could remember something, but I never really could. Apparently it looked like I had run a marathon or something. I was breathing heavily and sweating. Keep in mind I was little, and I would yell, "No, please no, he's going to get me." And when I would scream, I would grab my neck right where I have a birthmark that looks like a bear paw. I have heard things about apparently having marks of past life trauma. Who knows, maybe I was mauled by a bear.
Not me, but a friend's little sister. The whole family was out for dinner at a restaurant in a skiing village which they recently bought a cottage near. My friend's little sister, as soon as they walked in, said, "I know this place. My mother and I used to paint here." To which her mother replied, "We've never been here before, what do you mean?" She replied with, "No, my mother from before. We used to paint here all the time." The family was obviously a little freaked out, but didn't think much of it as she was pretty young, and they figured just messing around. Later on, though, when talking to the waitress, the little girl again adamantly mentioned how she used to paint there, and the waitress revealed that it, in fact, was an art studio for many years in the 1900s, but had been converted sometime in the early 2000s into a restaurant. Needless to say, the entire table, waitress included, got goosebumps and were at a loss for words.
Well, I'm not a parent, but I once told my mother I used to be your dad when I was a toddler. And if that's not weird enough, he died about 9 months before I was born.
Exactly 9 months, damn.
What's weird is some stories here have the previous life dying the same day or the day before the birth, while others die before the pregnancy. Makes you think if some of these souls are kicking others out, or if babies are just empty vessels until a soul chooses one.
When my son was about 4 years old, he told me that I would be his son in the next life. Pretty wild.
My daughter talks about her grandson all the time. I thought it was just an imaginary friend, but then, a couple nights ago, she came out of her room at bedtime absolutely sobbing and said, "I'm sad because I miss my grandson. He lives in my old house, in my old neighborhood." She has never lived anywhere other than this apartment. Edit. Totally thought this would get buried. To answer some questions. We have asked her about him, but it's pretty hit or miss on whether she'll actually answer or just think it's a fun game. The other night, after some questions, she told us that he sleeps in a crib and has a white tongue. But when I asked her his name a few hours ago, she said Guga and laughed and laughed. It totally could be just her imagination, but she also told me some weird things about the baby I lost a few months ago, which really makes me wonder if she remembers Tots knows things we don't.
I don't know how old I was, but when I was young, 6, I was in the car with my parents and I said something like, "Oh, I used to live there," while pointing at a house we were driving past. Turns out it was my great-great-grandmother's house.
One of my preschool students. What do you want to do when you're a kid again? Me. Well, grown-ups don't become kids again. We grow up and stay grown-ups. Her. Well, I remember when I was a grown-up and I drove a car, and now I'm a kid again.
My grandma has a story from when my dad was 2 to 3 years old. He told her once that he was almost born before, but was too sick and died and had to come back later. Turns out my grandma had at least one miscarriage before he was born that was likely due to birth defects caused by a medication she had been taking at the time.
Not me, but some of my grandma's siblings died in a house fire around the 60s to 70s. My mum's sister, around 15 to 25 at the time, was just talking with one of her cousin, who was about 5, like 30 years ago. And the 5-year-old was really scared of fire and acted a lot like one of my grandma's sisters, Tony. Then one day when my aunt reached over to light a candle, the 5-year-old cousin said, "Isn't it funny how last time we were sisters, but now we're cousins?" It freaked my aunt right out, apparently. Edit. Forgot to point this out, but 2 of my grandma's sisters died in the fire.
When he was around 4, my grandson used to talk about his job at the ice factory. One day he was talking about his boss, Farvo, and the day he quit. I asked him why he quit, and he turned to me and quite passionately said, "I'll tell you why I quit. They made me work 15 days in a row without a break, and I had enough of that." It was weird hearing all that righteous anger coming out of that little boy. My daughter just informed me that he was 3 when he always talked about working at the ice factory. So yeah, scary 3-year-olds.
IDKY, but this is fucking hilarious. I would lose my shit if a 4-year-old started complaining to me about his boss, Farvo, not giving him a day off from the ice factory in weeks.
This is like what I said to my mom. I had to take 2 buses and a train to get to work, and they were always late, which made me late, and then my boss would get on my case. Haha.
I had a brother pass away from brain cancer. At the time, we had a cat who was a calico and just sort of knew he was battling something. She was really mean to most people, but with him she was gentle. He would grab her paws and she would just let it happen. Well, about 3 years after he passed, my parents had another child, another boy. He was about 3 when he told my parents about the white, brown, and black cat that used to let him grab her paws. She had died about a year before he was born.
My son told my parents all about Coco and Boo Boo, described the cats to them. He was 4. My cats, Coco and Boo Boo, had died 4 or 5 years before he was born. When my mum showed him various pictures of cats we had had, he pointed them both out and told her Coco liked to knock things off the table. Coco had a nickname, Princess Knock It Off, because she would knock over anything she could. I didn't have any pictures of these cats myself, so he'd never seen them. I didn't talk to him about them either, because we had other cats now. Coco and Boo Boo were litter mates and a bonded pair.
My daughter is deathly afraid of fire because the fire at school killed my sister and my other mum was really sad. When she started preschool at 3, they had a fire drill and she cried hysterically until it was over and she was convinced there was no fire. I had to go pick her up and on the way home she told me she's glad they have fire drills so all of the kids don't die like at her last school. I'm still freaked out.
My niece used to say similar things, like, "Remember that time I got all burned up by the fire and my skin and my hair turned black and fell off?" I was like, no, I don't remember. And she just casually said, "Oh yeah, that was last time when I was a grown-up man before I became a baby again."
My family and I were driving through the Kent countryside, and my brother, about 3 at the time, announced, "Mummy, that was the field I died in once. A bayonet went through my tummy." I was 8 and remember wondering what a bayonet was. Exactly. At the same time, my parents looked at each other and asked him how he knew what bayonet was. He said he didn't know, and then became almost embarrassed and shy because of our collective reactions. There was no way he would have known about war or weapons, as this was the early 90s, and we didn't watch TV much at all. I'm a complete skeptic, but this creeps me out to this day.
This is the first one that made me think, how can kids know individual words you've never taught them? It's one thing to have memories, but how do you have the words to express it if they're still in the process of learning English? What if a kid spoke a different language in a past life? Has anyone ever heard a kid use words from a different language than their parents speak?
That would scare me to death.
Mine said that he had a dream he was in heaven or some other place before he was born, with lots of men in suits who had lined up every woman on the planet, and the suits told him to pick who would be his mum. The part that creeped me out is I remember my mum telling me I had a dream exactly like that as a child.
Well, I'm glad I at least once had good decision-making skills.
My daughter would refer to me as her new mommy. Then, as her vocabulary increased, she said, "You're my new mommy, but it's okay, I like you." Then one day, "You're my new mommy. I had 2 brothers, but they all died, but it's okay, BC, I like you." She never mentioned her real family again. Last time she did, she was about 3 or 4 years old.
When I was 3, I used to tell my mom stories about my other family every night before bed, the siblings I had, and the dog too. One day she took me to Target and I told her I wanted big girl undies, and she said she would buy them for me and I could wear them when I was potty trained. I told her that my other family already potty trained me, so I can start wearing them now. I put them on that day and never had an accident after that. She never potty trained me and was just shocked.
Would totally accept a creepy story for someone else potty training my kid.
I need to remember to have potty training pre-installed if I have any children.
Aged 2 or 3, my daughter told us about when she and her other parents had to run away from their burning house, but not just their house. Everything around them was on fire. They didn't escape. She also told us how warm and cozy it was in her mother's womb.
My son also liked to tell me how warm and cozy he was before he was born. He said it was nice there. I think he was in kindergarten during that conversation.
Now that sounds a lot like a nightmare I had around that age, which I suspect is also what they described, and possibly many other responses too.
For me, it was catching things on TV or in overheard conversations and having a vivid imagination. It would start with, "I wonder what it would have been like if that was me." And after telling myself the story so many times, I'd start to believe it. Most of the stuff was super outlandish though, so it was less, "Remember the house fire," and more, "Remember when vampire parents adopted me and gave me magic powers."
My little brother, when he was little, like 3 or 4, said that he was in the jungle saving animals, and one day he had to decide if he would stay with the animals or come live with us. He chose us, but reminded my mom that he couldn't stay forever. Just for a little while, he passed this last January at 26 years old. Edit. I appreciate the love. Everyone make sure to say what you need to those who need to hear it. I don't believe it's my place to tell the whole story, and I don't believe this is the forum, so I'll leave this as is. I also want to advocate for professional mental health for those who have experienced the loss of a child, sibling, parent, etc. Don't figure it all out alone. Go get help.
This comment section taught me something. Never lower your guard around 3-year-olds.
Yeah, why is everyone 3 years old? It makes it creepier.
My experience as a pre-K and kindergarten teacher is that 3-year-olds are right at the age when kids start to be able to recall people and things without seeing them. And this is the age when they also begin to understand past, present, and future.
Young enough to see everything, but old enough to talk mostly coherently about it without rationalizing it away.